Hello, welcome to Books on Fire podcast, where every Tuesday we feature an interview with an outstanding and award winning independently published author. I'm Rita Mills.
And I'm Sandy Lawrence. Here at Books on Fire, we spotlight independently published books and authors whose work stands out across all genres.
And I'm Jane Loeb Rubin, and I'm here today as a guest and delighted to be visiting with you.
How did you pronounce your middle name again? I saw it, or your last name, the one that's in the middle.
L-O-E-B, Loeb.
Loeb, okay, I wasn't sure. Okay.
Well, Jane, tell us a little bit about your book, Threadbare. I understand it's part of a series.
Yes, it is. It's actually the first book chronologically in the Gilded City Series that is published with Level Best Books, a small press publisher. It is the story of a fictionalized story of my great-grandmother, Matilda, who came to the United States through Castle Garden, New York, in 1866, a year after the Civil War. And her family settled on a farm in Harlem, and a series of events take place in her life where she ends up living in the Lower East Side of Manhattan and developing a product in the garment industry that helps her husband and her take their family out of poverty. And layered upon this story is a medical concern that ties into a genetic defect that I have, which really was the impetus behind writing this book. And that is a genetic defect called the BRCA1 defect that made me and made Tilly very vulnerable to breast and ovarian cancer. And so when I was diagnosed, I traced the genetics back as far as I could. And it took me to this woman who was my grandfather's mother, and no one could remember her name. So I went on a mission to figure out who it was, and I wanted to make sure that family members who were tied into that arm of our family tree were properly warned so that they could have increased surveillance. So I eventually found her name in a 1900 census report by tracking my grandfather, Julian, and it took me to Tilly. And so I initially, as a healthcare executive, set up a fundraising account with the Ovarian Cancer Research Fund in New York. And that fund enabled me to have a fund with my own identifier that fed money in through the back door into the mothership. And I named it after her, the Matilda Fund. And so up until I retired 5 years ago, I sent out a solicitation letter every year to raise money for this fund. And the year I retired, I was writing the solicitation letter, and I thought, oh, this poor woman, nobody remembered her name. I know so little about her life, just a few things. I am going to write a story about her. And that was the trigger to a huge process of research into that time period, research into the tenement buildings, into the farms in Harlem before that land was leveled to build more tenements, really, or apartment buildings, and the farms that moved out and where they went. And so now I'm publishing the third book of the series in May, that has now taken Tilly from Threadbare, her younger sister, into the hands of women, a female obstetrician in New York at the turn of the century, to 4 family members that go overseas to France during World War One. And so that is the trilogy. So it'll be finalized this year.
So
Well, I love the fact that Threadbare is the prequel. So you wrote the first book and then you wrote the prequel. And now
Right.
you're
And
writing the third book.
the third book's done and it's in my publisher's hand. I'm actually writing a fourth book that takes some of the family members into Prohibition, because the farmland in upstate New York was actually in the middle of the thoroughfare between Canada and New York City, and the bootleggers were constantly back and forth. So there was a lot of action going on in upstate New York. And so it's a sort of a fun ride after the seriousness of the war in over there.
well,
But
That's,
yes,
that's,
is the
yes.
Gilded City New York or Harlem or?
No, it refers to New York City,
Okay, I kind of figured.
because the upper part of New York was truly gilded. That's where all the real, well, if you'd watched the Netflix series, or was it on HBO? Um, there, people are fascinated with the Carnegies and Vanderbilts and the
Dollars.
wealthy families, but they were not the majority of New Yorkers during that time. The majority of New Yorkers came through Castle Garden and then Ellis Island, some days up to 1,000 a day. And many of them settled in the lower part of Manhattan, which was one gigantic slum. And the healthcare issues there, and keep in mind, my background is healthcare. So it's very interesting to me to track the history of what went on in the public health aspects of New York. The average age in 1900 was 46 for men and 48 for women.
Wow.
Infection, tuberculosis, pneumonia, GI infections were like terrible. That's what the three main causes of death. And the infant mortality rate was 20%. One out of every 5 babies did not make it to 1 year old. So it was rough. It was not we glorify it so much when we think about the affluent, but most of our ancestors who came through those ports did not have an easy time. They were a tough group, no matter what nationality it was.
That's
They
right.
all shared that common experience.
They had to be tough to come over in the holds of those ships,
Oh yes,
much
yeah.
less get here and try and feed themselves and make a living.
Well, it also speaks to how important it was to be connected with some kind of community. So the people who came that had ethnic connections, whether they were Irish or Italian or Jewish or German, I mean, their churches and synagogues did a lot to help get them um, set up and get their feet on the ground. And it really was it was truly a village of people helping others. And certainly a lot of people slipped through the cracks too. I mean, homelessness was rampant. Children were living on the street. And in some quarters where, particularly in the Irish areas where they had come over during the potato famine in the early mid 1800s, there was the social services in New York and the church services they were not prepared for the onslaught of immigrants, and a lot of those individuals really turned to crime.
So,
Yeah.
what was the most compelling challenge that you had when you were writing the book?
Um, I think with Threadbare, which I actually wrote first and published second because I had to rewrite it. I got my deal with my second book in the hands of women, and they gave me a 2-book deal. And I knew I was going to need to go back and rewrite Threadbare. And so, coming from an executive healthcare background where everybody writes these memos with bullet points, and there's no adjectives or adverbs or complex sentences, because nobody really wants to read. They want to just get the salient facts fast.
The
And
facts,
so
ma'am.
I was a very concise writer, and I thought I actually wrote executive briefs pretty well. But when I decided to write a book of historical fiction, the research was fun. That came as second nature. But writing in a compelling way was a craft that I have enjoyed learning it, but I really did. I was ill prepared compared to colleagues who have grown up writing and have written through their entire career. So I had a lot of catching up to do.
Well, it sounds like you caught up pretty quickly, though.
Yeah.
I had it in my heart, and I'm not a quitter. And I wrote every day. I mean, I've written practically every day now for 5 years. There was a day this week I took off because one of my children surprised me and visited with his family. And I just said, "You're not going near the computer, staying away from your phone. Enjoy this time because life is precious."
That's
And
right.
so I did, but that was an exception. I really do write every day. And so
But
I
you know,
practice.
of all the challenges that I've had authors tell me, and I've interviewed a lot of authors in the last 20 years, and so has Rita. And many of them we did together. I don't think anyone has ever had that as a challenge before. The fact that they wrote just absolutely just the facts and didn't expand on it or develop it or anything. So the good thing is you now have a very unique challenge that very few people had, and you've overcome it and done great with it. So I'm very excited for you. Thank you for
Oh,
sharing that.
I'm really um, very humbled by this experience. I really am. Um, the books, the two books that are out have sold remarkably well, and not just in a small demographic. They've been picked up by people I mean, I would expect that the Jewish reading audience would like my books because my characters are Jewish, but they're not religious Jews. They're people who are very blended into society, and I have a lot of requests from non-Jewish readers to come to events and to their book clubs and so forth. And I think that's because these themes that I'm dealing with women developing getting to the right to vote and having a voice about their rights in American society, as well as the immigration experience and kind of the families holding dearly to each other as they face incredible adversity, poverty, disease, access to education, and so forth. And these are not Jewish topics. These apply to our whole society. And so being able to speak to that and share that and have it resonate in such a way that, like Rita, you mentioned, having family members who sewed. I have people come up to me after events and tell me about little ledger books that their great great grandfather had in the tenements when they did piecemeal hand sewing,
Wow.
and they had like a tick list of how many pieces they completed. I mean, these things they're just remarkable. And so the fact that it's compelled other people to talk and remember and share their stories, to me, it brings so many people back to life. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like Matilda is, and it's interesting because as I was writing the third book, it was about 5 years since my mother passed away. She was 93, and I I just was missing her, and so I named one of the characters after her, and it was just so much fun because I was seeing her on so many pages, and it was like she was with me while I was writing the story, and
That gave me chills to think about. That's a great story.
Yeah.
It was just magical. And as writers, we could do whatever we want, and I have my own, boundaries that I follow, but certainly I have old neighbors' names in there. And now there people who remember me have gotten thrills out of this. And, they bring it to their book club and invite me to Zoom in and they have, they include me in their meetings. It's been a lot of fun.
Have you tried to get into I hate to call it a clique, but you have to kind of get into a network of going to the Jewish community centers throughout the United States they
Yeah,
do.
you're hitting on something that I am going to do a second year, although there's pluses and minuses like any decision. There's an organization that that has earned a lot of respect, called the Jewish Book Council, and
Mhm.
they're centered in New York. They're very expensive for authors to participate with, and they create a juried set of books every year that they do reviews on, and then they go out and they recommend those books to synagogues, to JCCs, to the Jewish community.
Mhm.
And they then do this little matchmaking between events and the authors. Um, I have had some success with that, but I have had enormous success through word of mouth because reading is still one of those pastimes that we like to talk about. It's like, what are you watching on Netflix or Amazon?
Mhm.
What are you reading? And particularly in the over 45 age group, you see a tremendous spike in readers. And maybe it's because kids are going off to college or leaving home and they have more time. And so that has taken off. And now that I'm into book 3, I have quite a following. It,
That's
you know,
always good.
it, it grows organically. I mean, you have to really
Yeah.
stay with it.
Well, I've done several projects with Jewish authors, and there was a couple of them that ended up getting with the Jewish Book Council and going on tours, but
Mhm.
I've had more that didn't go because they expect you to pay, your way, and they're like you said, there's just a lot of expense involved in it.
Yeah, there's a lot of expense. But they do have, when you get in their catalog, it's good.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of organizations in the Jewish community that want some kind of credential so that once you're in the catalog, they know you've been screened out,
Hmm.
screened in. And so that's good. But the other thing is too, in the historical fiction writing community, there's a lot of authors that are very gracious about helping each other. And so my new book has 2 authors who've been on the New York bestseller list. And an author like Fiona Davis, who just came out with a new book, and you both know Fiona Davis, right? She writes
Hmm.
historical fiction. She she's a really big name, and she's going to help promote my book on social media.
Good.
And so for every like over competitive author who doesn't share or doesn't want to help out, I think I've met 2 for each negative person who has really thrown the rope out and say, come on, your work is great. Let me help you along. And
Well,
that's really been heartwarming.
that's one of the things I've always liked about the book publishing industry. When my background was newspaper, a major metropolitan newspaper. And when I left there, I went to work as the managing editor of a publishing house at the University of Houston. I knew nothing about books, but I knew about deadlines and I knew how to coordinate the logistics and all that other kind of stuff. And I could pick up the phone and call any publisher, whether it was Random House or oh, I can't remember. It was Wolf was in the name, but there were several of them that I could call and ask any kind of question, and they would send me their list, and things that they had cultivated over the years. It's just a very giving community, and that's what we're trying to foster with the Fire Book Awards and the Books on Fire podcast that we're doing, because we are a community, just like when the immigrants first came over here and clustered in ethnic communities. It's the same way with books and publishing communities.
And I felt the same way when I first retired. My mother-in-law was an author, and she introduced me to Rita. And so Rita just kind of adopted me, and I just stayed with her wherever she went. I went, listened, and but one of the things I saw was like how generous Rita was, to share everything that she knew with me. And then other people we'd meet with would be the same way. And I told her one day, I'm like, I've never seen an industry that is so generous about helping you without being afraid that you're going to steal one of their secrets or something. Because I came from I worked for Hewlett Packard. My husband worked for IBM. And they were like, always people were saying, make sure you're not sharing any of this with your husband. And I'm like,
it's a much kinder industry. In the healthcare industry, where I spent 30 plus years in my professional life. But of course, I got paid a lot better.
That is a good point. Yes.
So, but I try and be like that. And I have made some really nice new friends in the last 5 years as a result. And I've also been lucky that from a marketing standpoint, I had an MBA, master's in business, and I worked. My job responsibilities touched on a lot of marketing. So being challenged with marketing my work was not as daunting as it is for a lot of writers.
Yeah.
I interacted with people constantly. I was interacting with other administrators, with medical staff, with nursing staff, with the public. And so getting up and speaking to a large crowd, I get one little gulp of nervousness, and as soon as I start going, I forget about any of it. And I just enjoy myself. So that's really tough for a lot of authors who are a little more introverted than someone like myself. And I really feel for them, because that's part of how you get out there and get your book known.
That's right. You're the one that's got to sell that. I had a children's picture book press for 4 or 5 years. And the books were my idea. And basically, I was the one that created them, except for the writing. And a lot of times I had to more or less do a lot of that as well. But I couldn't go out and sell them through the schools and school fairs and stuff like that, because nobody was interested in the publisher. They wanted the author. The authors won everybody. They're looked up to as gods.
So why did you choose a small press publisher, rather than go with an agent and go to Random House?
Time. I'm a 16-year ovarian cancer survivor. I didn't have a 3-year cycle per book to play with. And, if there's one thing cancer does, it makes you a realist. It makes you do a lot of things differently. And for me, it was because I came from a healthcare background, maybe just the way I'm wired psychologically, I'm very realistic about the fact that I'm one of the lucky ones. And I don't have that kind of time to play with. What happens if the books are really that great after I'm gone, they may get picked up, and things may happen with a series, because people tell me they're very, very visual stories. You can really picture the grime in the Lower East Side, and you get to over there, you could really picture these hospitals right near the battlefield, and that'll be great. But my family will enjoy it. For me, I wanted the satisfaction of writing it, publishing it, and getting it out. And the small press cycle, if you can get a small press, I was very fortunate to get picked up quickly. But if you can get a small press, it's usually within an 18-month cycle from the time you start. And so I have been having a book a year. So Threadbare, In the Hands of Women, came out in May of 23, no, 24, no, 23, Threadbare in May of 25, and Over There's coming out right after Memorial Day weekend this year in 25. 23, 24.
Amazing.
Yeah, so Threadbare was 24, and then the
Right.
new one will be 25.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
right. Well, that's then you'll have another book to submit to the Fire Book Awards this year.
Oh, okay.
Well, you
It
did well with
actually,
this. You did well, so you might
actually,
as well.
this book, this new one that's coming out Over There, I submitted to a first chapters competition by the Historical Novel Society. It's an
Oh,
internet,
okay.
and it came in on their short list of
Oh
10.
my gosh.
So I'm very, that really pumped me.
You
So
know, that is such a prestigious organization. I was very impressed. I had a client a few years ago, or several years ago, really, over 20 years ago, because I haven't been doing it since then. But he was an attorney in Austin, and he had written a series of books about World War II, and some of it was very, very different, a different kind of book. And I sent his book to them, and they asked him to come speak to the organization when it was in Tampa several years ago. And I know it's going to be in Las Vegas, I believe, this year. But if you get a chance to go and speak to that group, again, it's like the Jewish group. You kind of pay your own expenses to get there. They don't fly you there or anything like that.
no, they last year the program was in England, and they
Right.
had given us free virtual access to the conference, and it was wonderful. I wanted to go this year to Vegas, but I have 7 grandchildren, and one of the families wanted me to go out to the Grand Canyon and Sedona with them. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's that they're my number one priority.
I could not agree with you more. I feel the exact same way. I have 10 grandchildren, so I feel that way.
They
Exactly.
they just make my heart sing, and
Mhm.
that's good medicine. So I take that medicine as much as I can.
Yeah,
Well, speaking of family and history, what when you were doing your family history, and I'm a big Finding Your Roots fan. I watch that every time it comes on, or try to.
Mhm.
What was the most shocking thing about people in your family that you found out?
Well, there were a lot of hidden secrets. A lot of hidden secrets, and I get together with 2 of my first cousins on the Tilly side of the family, every summer, 'cause my husband and I have a lovely lake home in Northern Jersey, and I invite cousins up for a weekend, and we eat and drink and talk, and there was a lot of, um there were a lot of unhappy people on my father's family, and his parents actually got divorced in the late 1920s, and they had 3 sons. My father was the middle son, and I found out last summer that my uncle, the oldest brother, had, in the midst of all of this arguing and misery at home, had taken my father and his little brother, who were both under 10, and ran away with them and hitchhiked from Brooklyn, New York, all the way up to Lake George, which is in upstate New York.
Yeah.
Had to be 150 miles, and on 2-lane roads. And and then, of course, like most family stories, you don't have the whole story. You have just this little cameo of this is what the piece of the story that was handed down. And
Mhm.
and so I said to my cousin, "Oh my God, I can't believe they did that." And as a matter of fact, over I'm opening the fourth book with that scene,
Ah,
the runaway kids. I said, "What a great way to open a book, of these kids running away." And so that was a super surprise. The farm in Harlem was so interesting because I dug into the history there and discovered that there was a family similar to the Rothschilds of Germany, German Jews with a lot of banking money. And they had a foundation that they set up in the mid 1800s to help the poor Jewish population in New York farm in upstate New York. And also they set it up in Israel, which was like way before, the statehood. So you discover this stuff as you're digging into history, and I'm wondering how many family members I've just never could get a hold of. I mean, or find out about. It's really, I think, very, very interesting.
well, I
Mm.
can. I have a client who's Mormon, and he gave me access to the back end of their big genealogy computer stuff, which is supposed to be the best out there that there is. And I
Mhm.
can find names, but I can't find specifics, about them. So I don't understand how Lewis Gossett finds all of these little interesting tidbits about these people.
Well, they have a lot of money to work with.
Yeah, I
They
guess
they
so.
have a robust budget for all this detective work they do. But from a novelist standpoint, you just really do need the framework. And I like writing about these characters who were so-called ordinary people. I know a lot of historical fiction writers, they'll pick a person who maybe was a little bit obscure but real, and like Margaret Fuller, Finding Margaret Fuller, beautifully written book, but it was about a real person. Um, but I think that the fabric of our society has been really made up of ordinary people, and ordinary people who have pushed themselves to the limit to do extraordinary things. And
Exactly.
and there and I think that's why the women got the vote. It wasn't because of a few famous names. It was a tidal wave of women who wanted to self-actualize a little more, and who weren't content to do the ordinary. They wanted to do something beyond that. They were jealous of the things that the boys got to do, and they were smart and they wanted to do it too. And so I make Matilda Tilly in Threadbare one of those women. She wasn't content to just be home with her children. She was the smartest girl in her class at school. She was supposed to go to high school and was denied. She thought, like a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, that if she got married, then she'd get more freedom. And she
Ah,
realized that she was buried in a trap, and yet she's still, because of her nature, she still managed to develop a company that was quite successful. And of course, it's all fictional, but I have to believe that there were lots and lots of women like that. And particularly keeping in mind that if the mortality rate was what it's recorded as, there were a lot of widows. And they had big families because there was no birth control. Birth control was illegal back then. And they didn't even know about ovulation yet. So they were getting pregnant willy-nilly. They had big families to support. And if, God forbid, their spouse died, they had a lot on their plate. And so I'm sure many of them worked, and even though they might not have formally been able to own businesses officially, they found a way to make it happen, you know,
Yeah.
because
Wow, this has been great. I love just learning about not just you, but you also, but all that you learned through your research and all that the work you did to bring those stories to light, and so
Mhm.
not just the stories themselves, but what those stories exemplified for those of us that read them today. So what
Right.
was for me that's very rewarding to hear and to be able to even to talk to you about it. What was rewarding for you about this whole thing that you knew, this whole new career that you've had?
Um, I think there's a few things that kind of tickle me. One is what you find down rabbit holes when you start researching. You find some amazing stories about New York City, what was there before buildings that we see today, and that was really super neat. I really have enjoyed meeting readers. I I just that's sort of my social life now that I'm retired, because I didn't have all those years at home making friends. I had work friendships that mostly dissolved after I left my organization. I felt like my footprints in the sand filled in really fast. Um, and all those hours and all that, like, anxiety that I had being there, rain or shine or snowstorm. I mean, hospitals are 24/7. You can't not go to work. And so I have formed some really nice friendships through the writing community. But my readers and the things that they share with me from what they've got out of the books is just magnificent. It's just the best. So
Well,
that's those are
ha-
I'm a very simple person, you know? I still feel like an imposter in this business.
just pinch yourself. You don't think it's real. Been there a few times.
Yeah, it is a pinch yourself kind of feeling, but it's also, you know, I was at this event with 300 women last week, and they were raising money for University of Miami's Cancer Center, and they asked me to be their keynote, and it was quite an honor. Um, and the food came late, you know, so you can imagine that if the food comes late, that's a crisis. So, well, just to kill time, I went around to the tables and welcomed people, and I felt like the bride, you know. It was, and you know, first people were looking up like, "Why are you interrupting me?" And who are you? And I said, "Well, you know, Jane Rubin, I'm the author." And they're like, "Whoa!" And and it was just very cute. And then later, I was sitting at the table signing books, and one of the women came over and she said, "I have been to so many of these events, and never once has an author come over to my table to say hello." And I thought, wow, I mean, you know, they're either too shy, because authors are often too shy, or they think they're too good.
Yeah, exactly.
They're, you know, looking at their watch and they're figuring, "Okay, I need to get out of here. I've only gotten X amount of money. I'm not gonna linger." And I just felt like it was just this huge party that we were all sharing in, to do something really great, because I've been on numerous treatments, and they thank thankfully, most all of them have worked for at least a couple of years. And to just keep grinding out that research and coming up with new things is keeping so many people like myself alive. It's, my oncologist kids around when I ask, well, I mean, what are you thinking? How long do you think I'm going to hang in there? And he goes, oh, you got another 1,000 pages.
Good
So he's
comeback.
not measuring it in years now; it's pages. That's very good. That's
So
very
I choose to think positively, and maybe I'll finish this fourth book and see how I feel.
Well, I'd love talking to you about that. I was diagnosed with breast cancer I'm 81 when I was 79. I mean, but by then I thought I had escaped all of those kind of diseases. But no, I went to I felt the lump and went, and it was breast cancer. I didn't have to have a mastectomy, just a lumpectomy. But it was caused by estrogen and all of that. So I'm on this plan or this program that I have to be on for 10 years of this infusion I have to go have done. And it just leaves me really, I mean, not deathly ill, but just for the next month, I just don't feel like I'm so tired I can hardly do anything. So, but I'm like, nope, because he said, your chances of not getting it by doing this are reduced drastically. So anyway, so I just wanted you to know I do really appreciate what you've done and what you've gone through, and the fact that you found out you did have that breast disease. And so my thoughts and prayers will be with you as you continue this. And I would love to stay in touch with you and stay. And I did sign up for I went to your newsletter or whatever was on your website. So
Good. I
so
sometimes
I
think
will.
about that. I'm not. I started my newsletter when I retired before I decided to write a book, and I thought, well, I want to get back to writing because I had written a cancer memoir, an essay memoir, about 12 years ago, and it was really about finding strength and through your family stories. And I did it really for my grandkids. And my first grandchild was still in the womb, and I didn't think I'd ever meet her. And now she's 15. So, and I have 6 others. But at the time, I wanted them to hear my voice. And so that was my first foray into writing. And I just, I just started. I wanted to do something that was going to cultivate that skill. And I thought, well, I'll have a blog about retirement. And lots of it was funny in the beginning, like finding out your dry cleaner's first name. I said, like I was like one of these people who whisked in and whisked out and never stopped to be in the moment. And so to stop and talk to people and find out a little bit about them. And, the next thing you know, his son was a big deal football player who was playing, and I was like, he was a bench player mostly on one of the pros, and he was killed in a car accident. And he's telling me this story, and I'm thinking, I never gave this guy a minute. And here he is, this whole person. And so I really started paying a lot of attention to things like that and the people around me, the world that we're a part of. And you know, I don't want to ever have to work as hard as I did in my career. And I work hard at writing, but it's pleasure and it's sort of on my terms. So, and it's nice because I've learned so much about people and life over the years, and I really like to channel it into my stories.
That's amazing. That is really amazing.
Well, Jane, this has been very informative and interesting, and it's been a pleasure to meet you and get to share some of your thoughts with you. Uh, I hope everyone's enjoyed, the interview as much as we have. I hate to go. We could keep talking forever here.
Well,
And you're on vacation.
you have both been lovely. And thank you for helping elevate the exposure of my work. And I really appreciate the time you've taken with me. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. And until next time, keep those books burning.
Okay.
Thank you, Jane.
Bye-bye.